this one in the East India Company text, we were interested in not in the usual stories about East India Company, that it impoverished India or that it helped the British Empire build the British Empire, but we were interested in how they made money. What were the principles? It was, after all, one of the first joint stock companies in the world. And in fact, it's a forerunner to the multinational corporation of today. So the same hierarchical structures, the accountability that was given by the owners to the managers, the ship captains, etc. And of course, there's a lot of romance in these stories. For example, in the second voyage of the East India Company, they land up in Sumatra, and they find that there is a Portuguese ship already laden with spices, which they are eyeing with great jealousy. So they sneak up to the king of Sumatra, fill him with presents. This is the East India Company guys. And then they say, give us a concession. And finally he agrees if they bring him an English woman in the next voyage to become his queen. And so they agree. And they say, by the way, do you mind if we steal that ship? And so he says he's going to look the other way. And that's what they do. They take over the Portuguese ship and make a huge profit because there's no cost.
That's right. Yeah.
And just see what the profitability, and that's how the East India Company gets started. So it's great stories of adventure and romance, but for us it's principles also that we can learn today from these books. And certainly one thing that comes through in all, the principle that comes through again and again is the notion of trust. That especially when it comes to the Indian merchant communities that we deal with.
That's true. They ran pretty much on trust.
Yeah. I mean, we'll have a volume on the Marwadis, written by Tom Timberg. We'll have a volume on the Kachis, the ancestors of our Wipro guy,
That's right.
Azim
Azim
Premji.
Premji.
And we're going to talk about this golden triangle of trade from Mandavi in Kutch to Muscat to Zanzibar, and how they took cotton goods, the clothes from India, got coral and pearls from Muscat, and got ivory from Zanzibar. And that was the golden triangle for almost 200 years of trade. And there is, then we have the Chettiar, going to your part of the world. The Chettiar community, we have Raman Mahadevan doing on the Chettiars.
The Natukota Chettiar.
Natukota Chettiars. And in the Three Merchants of Bombay, we have a wonderful story about Jamshedji Jijiboy, based on the latest records that have just come out about the family, written by Lakshmi Subramaniam. So in these Indian communities, the merchant communities, what strikes you always is the sense of word. That hundi was a piece of paper, was like a promissory note. And for that hundi to be honored hundreds of miles away, there's a war going on in between, and being honored in China, being honored in Russia, being honored in Kanpur, Calcutta, Bombay, was something. And they, the most touching experience of that was this notion of trust, that in this Three Merchants of Bombay, there's a story of Premchand Roychand. The Rajabai Tower in Bombay, he donated 5 lakhs in 1956 or something like that. And it was a lot of money at that time. He was the cotton king of India. It was the time of the American Civil War. And because of the Civil War, the cotton from the American South got closed to the mills of Manchester. And Indian merchants, to their credit, as well as Indian farmers in Gujarat, they started growing that cotton, the staple, long staple that was required. Within 7 months, they were supplying to the mills. And the huge boom on the cotton exchange. I mean, every panwala in Bombay was investing in the cotton exchange and making huge fortunes. But one day, that civil war came to an end, and the market crashed, and fortunes were lost. One of the persons who did not get, whose shirt was not lost, was the ancestor of the Birlas, of G.D. Birla's grandfather. And anyway, the person who lost the biggest was the Cotton King, Premchand Roy Chand. But to his credit, he paid back every rupee that he worked. He did whatever he had to. He sold his palaces, he sold his properties, but they made good on all their promises. And you know what? Sushil Premji, his great-grandson, says that, he started with the widows when he started paying back, because he said, who needs the money the most? And he returned that money. So that sense of trust on which they transacted, that trust was their word. I mean, on a piece of paper, they would say, I'm borrowing once. One could be 1 crore, 1 lakh, 1,000. But that comes through in an amazing way. And the risk-taking ability of these people. I mean, talk about how G.D. Birla made his fortune in the jute business in Calcutta during the First World War. Is an amazing story. They called it the Fatka Bazaar, which is the futures market.
That's right.
And so you have these wonderful stories of
and not all of them are like, some of them are also stories of what not to do, right? No.
Yes, I mean, you learn a lot from the mistakes they make. And the interesting story about the Tarachand Ghanshyamdas family is that here was the greatest Marwadi firm of the 19th century. I mean, they used to lend money to the princes they used to lend money to the princes of Rajasthan. This was the Podars. They lent money to the Nizam of Hyderabad, all the Maharaja of Kashmir. They were their clients. They lent money to the East India Company. And here's a firm that collapsed